The war had been going on for 3 long years. Nobody expected it to last this long when it first started. What began as small fights at the edge of space had grown into something terrible. Now entire star systems were burning, and whole planets were being eaten alive by an enemy that seemed to come from the darkest nightmares. The Andromedan Coalition was losing badly. This was hard to believe, because the Coalition had some of the strongest races in the galaxy. The Etherians flew ships made of living crystal that could bend light itself into weapons. Their cities floated in space like beautiful jewels, each one protected by shields that had never been broken in 1,000 years of smaller wars. The Corvin were warriors born and bred for battle. Their ancestors had conquered half the galaxy before they learned to make peace. Every Corvin child could field strip a plasma rifle before they could properly walk. Their warships were built like flying fortresses, each one capable of destroying a moon if needed. Then there were the Zephyrians, whose technology was so advanced that other races called it magic. They could fold space like paper, making their cake. Ships appear anywhere in the galaxy within hours. Their quantum computers could predict enemy movements days before they happened. Some said the Zephyrians had learned to talk directly to the laws of physics themselves. All 3 of these mighty races, plus dozens of smaller ones, had joined together to fight the Void Swarm. For 3 years they had thrown everything they had at this enemy. Millions of ships, weapons that could crack planets, strategies developed over thousands of years of warfare. Nothing worked. The Void Swarm was different from any enemy the galaxy had ever seen. Their ships looked like they were grown rather than built. Black metal flowed like liquid over organic curves that seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat. These ships could heal themselves when damaged, growing new armor and weapons from materials they consumed from destroyed vessels. But the worst part was how smart they were. Not smart like the Zephyrians, who planned everything carefully. The swarm was smart like a pack of wolves, but with millions of wolves all thinking as one. Every time the Coalition tried a new tactic, the swarm learned from it and found a way to counter it. Every weapon the Coalition developed was soon turned against them by captured ships that had been changed and twisted into hybrid monsters. Captain Jake Morrison sat in his small office at the Earth Defense Command, watching the latest reports from the front lines. The Coalition was asking for help from everyone, even from races that had never left their home systems. The message was always the same: join us or die alone when the swarm comes for you. Jake was a career military man, 42 years old, with gray starting to show in his dark hair. He had served in 3 different human conflicts, but nothing had prepared him for reports like these. Entire solar systems just gone, eaten from the inside out. Billions of people dead or worse, converted into something that served the swarm. On Earth, the debates were getting louder every day. President Lisa Hamilton called emergency meetings almost daily now. She was a smart woman who had led the planet through economic troubles and natural disasters. But this was beyond anything any human leader had ever faced. General Pete Bradley was the loudest voice calling for immediate action. He was old-school military, the kind of man who believed that when evil showed its face, good people had a duty to fight it. He paced around the Situation Room like a caged tiger whenever anyone suggested staying neutral. "We cannot sit here and wait," Bradley argued during one heated meeting. "Every day we delay, the swarm gets stronger. They are not going to stop at Coalition space. They will come for Earth eventually, and when they do, we will face them alone." Secretary of State Amy Rodriguez disagreed strongly. She was younger than most of the other officials, but she understood politics better than anyone in the room. Her concerns were practical rather than emotional. "We barely have 50 ships capable of deep space combat," Rodriguez pointed out. "The Coalition races have technology that is hundreds of years ahead of ours. What can we possibly do that they cannot?" This was the heart of the problem. Humanity had only been in space for about a century. While the coalition races had been building star empires for thousands of years, humans were still learning how to build reliable spacecraft that could travel between star systems. The newest human ship was primitive compared to the oldest Etherian. Cruiser Dr. Ryan Torres spent his days in the underground laboratories beneath Colorado trying to find an answer to that question. He was one of the smartest people on Earth, a physicist who understood things about the universe that most people could not even pronounce. But even he felt small when he looked at the technical specifications of coalition technology. Torres had been working around the clock since the war began, trying to find something, anything, that humans could contribute. His team had made small improvements to human weapons and shields, but nothing that would make a real difference in a galactic war. The breakthrough came when Torres stopped trying to match coalition technology and started thinking about what made humans different. He remembered something his grandfather had told him when he was young. When you cannot win by being stronger, win by being smarter. Meanwhile, the war news kept getting worse. The Corvin homeworld, a planet that had never been conquered in 5,000 years of warfare, fell to the swarm in less than a week. The few survivors who escaped described ships that seemed to learn and adapt in real time, developing new weapons and defenses faster than anyone thought possible. The Etherian crystal cities, those beautiful floating jewels that had been the pride of their civilization, were under direct attack. Their light shields, which had protected them for a millennium, were being slowly eaten away by swarm weapons that seemed to feed on energy itself. Even the Zephyrians, with all their advanced technology and quantum computers, were being pushed back. Their ability to predict enemy movements became useless when facing an enemy that could change its plans faster than their computers could calculate new predictions. Admiral Vera Castellanos sent increasingly desperate messages to Earth. She was the Coalition's top military commander, a woman who had won more space battles than any other living person. If she was worried, then the situation was truly hopeless. "We need every ally we can find," her latest message said. "I know humanity is young in the ways of space warfare, but sometimes a fresh perspective can see solutions that experience misses. Please, we are running out of time." The message arrived during another emergency meeting in the White House Situation Room. President Hamilton played it for the assembled officials, and the room fell silent when it ended. Even the most reluctant voices had to admit that the woman on the screen was genuinely afraid. Jake Morrison watched the faces around the table. These were good people trying to make an impossible decision: send humanity's tiny fleet to help in a war they probably could not win, or stay home and hope the coalition could somehow pull victory from defeat. "What if they are right?" Jake finally spoke up. "What if we cannot match their technology or their numbers? What if the only thing we can offer is a different way of thinking?" Torres looked up from the technical reports he had been reading. Different how? Jake thought about humanity's short but violent history. Every major war in human history was won by someone who changed the rules. Maybe that is what the galaxy needs right now. Not better technology, but different thinking. The debate would continue for several more weeks, but the seed of an idea had been planted. While the coalition forces continued to fall back across dozens of star systems, a small group of humans began working on something that would change the course of the war. They just did not know it yet. While the great powers of the galaxy kept throwing bigger and bigger fleets at the Void Swarm, humanity decided to try something completely different. The decision came after President Hamilton finally gave the order to join the war, but with one important condition: humans would fight their own way. Colonel Dan Fletcher was chosen to lead what the military called the Strategic Innovation Unit. Fletcher was not like most military officers. He had started his career as an engineer before joining the Army, and he had a habit of looking at problems from angles that made other people uncomfortable. His superiors often called him difficult, but they could not argue with his results. Fletcher's first decision surprised everyone. Instead of gathering the best military minds on Earth, he asked for volunteers from completely different fields. He wanted video game players, computer programmers, puzzle solvers, and people who made their living by thinking outside the box. One of his first recruits was Lieutenant Maya Johnson. Maya had been a professional video game player before joining the military. She had won 3 world championships in strategy games that required players to manage resources, predict enemy movements, and adapt to changing conditions in real time. The military had recruited her because they realized that modern warfare was becoming more like the complex games she had mastered. That Maya brought a different way of thinking about tactics. Where traditional military strategy focused on controlling territory and destroying enemy forces, game strategy was about finding patterns, exploiting weaknesses, and winning through clever moves rather than brute force. She could see possibilities that trained officers missed because they were thinking like soldiers instead of players. Chief Engineer Carlos Vega was another unusual choice. Vega had spent most of his career working on civilian projects, turning everyday technology into tools that could solve unexpected problems. He once helped rescue miners trapped underground by turning a construction robot into a drilling machine. Another time, he had saved a space station by using coffee makers to filter contaminated air. Vega looked at the Coalition's military technology and immediately saw the problem. All of their weapons and ships were designed to fight wars the way they had always been fought. Nobody had thought about what would happen if the enemy could adapt faster than traditional strategies could respond. The breakthrough came when Dr. Elena Reeves joined the team. Reeves was a behavioral psychologist who studied how groups of people think and act together. The military brought her in to help understand human behavior in combat, but she became fascinated by something else entirely, the behavior of the Void Swarm. Reeves spent weeks studying every piece of footage from Swarm attacks. She watched how their ships moved, how they responded to different threats, and how they adapted their tactics during battles. What she found was something that all the military experts had missed. They are not random, she explained to Fletcher's team during a late-night meeting. Everyone thinks the swarm adapts randomly, but that is not true. They follow patterns, just like any other group intelligence. The problem is that their patterns are based on principles that none of the Coalition races understand. Reeves had discovered that the swarm operated like a vast computer network. Each ship was like a single computer connected to millions of others. They shared information instantly, learned from every battle, and could coordinate their actions across entire star systems. But like any network, they had vulnerabilities that could be exploited if someone understood how they worked. The key insight came from an unexpected source. Sergeant Kim Parker was a communications specialist who had joined the military after working in computer security. Her job was to protect military networks from hackers and viruses. When she heard Reeves talking about the swarm's network-like behavior, something clicked in her mind. What if we treat them like a computer network? Parker suggested. I mean, what if we do not try to destroy their ships? What if we try to hack their system instead? The idea was so simple that nobody had thought of it before. The Coalition races had been trying to fight the swarm using traditional warfare. Bigger guns, stronger shields, better tactics. But the swarm was not really a traditional enemy. They were more like a living computer system that happened to fly around in spaceships. Dr. Torres, working in his laboratory, began developing what he called a quantum disruption array. The idea was to create a device that could interfere with the quantum entanglement that allowed the swarm ships to communicate with each other. If they could disrupt that communication, the swarm's greatest strength would become a weakness. Technical challenges were enormous. Quantum entanglement was not well understood even by human scientists, and the swarm used it in ways that seemed impossible according to human physics. Torres spent sleepless nights trying to figure out how to build a device that could affect something he barely understood. The solution came from combining human creativity with desperate necessity. Torres could not match the advanced quantum technology of the coalition races, but he could build something simpler and more direct. Instead of trying to understand exactly how the swarm's communication worked, he would just jam it with massive amounts of quantum noise. Commander Alex Turner was put in charge of building the ships that would carry this experimental technology into battle. Turner had experience with unconventional projects, having previously worked on experimental spacecraft that pushed the limits of human engineering. The ships Turner designed were nothing like the massive battleships used by coalition forces. Human ships were small, fast, and built for a specific purpose. Each one carried a quantum disruption array, advanced computers, and enough speed to get in and out of battle quickly. They looked fragile compared to coalition warships, but they were designed to do something completely different. Maya Johnson worked on the tactical systems that would guide these ships in battle. She drew on her gaming experience to create something that had never been tried in real warfare, a tactical AI that could think like a human player, rather than a traditional military computer. Most military AI systems were designed to follow established strategies and respond to predictable enemy actions. Maya's system was built to be creative, to find unexpected solutions, and to adapt faster than any human commander could think. It could coordinate the movements of dozens of ships in patterns that looked random but were actually carefully calculated. To achieve specific goals, the development process took months while the war continued to rage across the galaxy. Every day brought news of more coalition defeats, more worlds lost to the swarm. The pressure on the human team was enormous. They were humanity's only contribution to a war that seemed hopeless. Colonel Fletcher kept his team focused by reminding them that they were not trying to save the galaxy through superior firepower. They were trying to save it through superior thinking. Every human advantage they could identify was built into their ships and systems. The final piece of the puzzle came from Sergeant Parker's work on what she called the chaos virus. This was not a traditional computer virus, but rather a pattern of quantum interference that would spread through the swarm's network and cause their ships to malfunction. The virus was designed to target the specific way the swarm ships shared information. Instead of trying to destroy that information, it would corrupt it, causing the ships to receive contradictory orders and conflicting data. The result would be chaos within the swarm's normally perfect coordination dot as the human fleet prepared for launch. The coalition forces were in full retreat. Entire sectors had been abandoned, and even the strongest coalition worlds were preparing for siege. Admiral Castellanos sent a final message to Earth. Whatever you are planning, it needs to happen soon. We cannot hold them much longer. Captain Morrison, now in command of the human fleet, looked at his 50 small ships and wondered if they could really make a difference. Each ship represented months of work and humanity's best ideas about how to fight an impossible enemy. But 50 ships against thousands seemed like a hopeless gesture. We are not trying to win through strength, Fletcher reminded him before launch. We are trying to win through intelligence. Sometimes the smallest key can open the biggest lock. The human fleet jumped hyperspace, carrying with them humanity's one chance to prove that being different could be more important than being powerful. The Nexus system had never seen a battle like this before. For hundreds of years, it had been a peaceful crossroads where different races came to trade and share knowledge. Now, it was about to become the site of the Coalition's final stand against the Void Swarm. Admiral Vera Castellanos stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Starfire, and looked out at what remained of the once mighty Coalition fleet. Less than 200 ships hung in space around the primary jump gate, all that was left of the thousands that had started this war 3 years ago. Each ship represented the survivors of dozens of battles, crews who had watched their friends die and their worlds burned out. The Nexus system was chosen for this battle because of its strategic importance. The system contained the largest natural jump gate in this part of the galaxy, a massive ring of exotic matter that could transport ships across thousands of light years instantly. If the swarm captured this gate, they would have direct access to over 40 populated worlds, including some of the most important planets in Coalition space. Castellanos was 58 years old and had been fighting wars since she was 20. She had won more space battles than any other living commander, but she had never faced anything like the Void Swarm. This enemy was different from every other foe she had encountered. They learned from every battle, adapted to every strategy, and seemed to grow stronger with each victory. The defensive formation she had arranged around the jump gate represented centuries of military wisdom. The Etherean ships were positioned at the front, their crystal hulls and energy shields designed to absorb the first wave of enemy attacks. Behind them, the surviving Corvin heavy cruisers waited with their massive guns ready to punch holes in the swarm formation. The Zephyrian science vessels hung back, using their advanced sensors to coordinate the battle and predict enemy movements. It was a formation that should have been able to hold against any normal enemy. But the swarm was not normal. The enemy arrived exactly when the Zephyrian computers predicted they would. They came through hyperspace in a cloud of darkness that seemed to swallow the light from nearby stars. Thousands of biomechanical ships of every size and shape, from small fighters that moved like angry insects to massive capital ships that looked like floating cities of living metal. Captain Jake Morrison watched the approaching enemy from the bridge of his ship, the Defiant. He and the human fleet were still several hours away from the battle, but they could monitor the Coalition communications and see what was happening. What he saw made his heart sink. The battle began with the Coalition using their standard tactics. The Etherean ships opened fire first, their crystal weapons sending beams of pure energy across the darkness of space. The light was beautiful and terrible at the same time, cutting through the swarm formation like swords made of starfire. For a moment, it looked like the Coalition might actually win. The first wave of swarm ships was destroyed or damaged there. The biomechanical hulls torn apart by weapons that had been perfected over thousands of years of warfare. The Corvin heavy cruisers added their firepower, sending streams of plasma that turned entire sections of the enemy fleet into expanding clouds of superheated gas. But then the swarm began to adapt. Commander Rachel Stevens, monitoring the battle from her position on Morrison's bridge, watched in horror as the enemy ships began to change. The biomechanical hulls started to shift and flow, growing new types of armor that could deflect the Etherean energy beams. Weapons that had been destroying swarm ships minutes before were suddenly having no effect at all. They are learning. In real time, Stevens said, her voice filled with disbelief. They are actually changing their ship designs during the battle. The swarm's counterattack was swift and brutal. Their ships had analyzed the Coalition weapons and developed new tactics to counter them. Instead of fighting in the organized formations that the Coalition expected, they began to swarm around individual ships like predators attacking prey. The Etherean shields, which had protected their crystal cities for 1,000 years, began to fail under attacks from weapons that seemed to feed on energy itself. The beautiful ships that looked like floating jewels started to crack and shatter, their light growing dim as their power systems were drained. The Corvin warriors fought with the courage their race was famous for, but courage alone was not enough. Against an enemy that could adapt faster than they could change tactics. Their heavy cruisers, built like flying fortresses, found themselves surrounded by small, Fast swarm ships that could slip past their defenses and attack from unexpected angles. Even worse, the Coalition began to see their own ships turned against them. When a Coalition vessel was destroyed, the swarm did not just leave the wreckage floating in space. Instead, their biomechanical technology would flow over the destroyed ship like a living thing, absorbing its materials and technology. Minutes, the destroyed Coalition ships would rise again as hybrid creatures that combined the best of both technologies. These hybrid ships were the most terrifying enemies the Coalition had ever faced, because they used familiar weapons and tactics in ways that their creators had never intended. Captain Morrison watched a Corvin heavy cruiser get overwhelmed by a dozen smaller swarm ships. The cruiser fought bravely, its guns blazing until the very end, but it was eventually torn apart by weapons that seemed to eat through its armor like acid. Within 10 minutes, the wreckage had been consumed and reformed into something that looked like a nightmare version of the original ship. The hybrid vessel that emerged was still recognizably Corvan in design, but it had been changed in horrible ways. Biomechanical growths covered its hull like tumors, and its weapons had been modified to fire some kind of corrosive energy that could eat through Coalition shields. When it rejoined the battle, it fought with all the tactical knowledge of its original crew, but serving the swarm instead of the Coalition. Admiral Castellanos tried every strategy she had learned in 40 years of warfare. She reorganized her fleet into smaller, more flexible groups. She attempted surprise attacks and coordinated strikes. She even tried retreating and regrouping, hoping to draw the swarm into a trap. Nothing worked. For every new tactic the Coalition tried, the swarm had an answer within minutes. Their collective intelligence could process information and develop counter-strategies faster than any individual commander could think. It was like fighting an enemy that could read her mind and predict her moves before she made them. The Zephyrian science vessels, with all their advanced technology and quantum computers, found themselves facing an enemy that could outcalculate them. The swarm's collective processing power was simply too vast for even the most advanced individual computer systems to match dot. As the battle continued, the Coalition losses mounted rapidly. Ships that had survived dozens of previous battles were destroyed in minutes. Crews that had served together for years were scattered across the void. The defensive formation that had been carefully planned over weeks of preparation fell apart in less than 2 hours. Captain Morrison received increasingly desperate communications from Admiral Castellanos. Her voice, normally calm and confident, was beginning to show the strain of watching her fleet being systematically destroyed. "We cannot hold them," she admitted during one transmission. "They adapt too quickly. Every time we find a weakness, they fix it before we can exploit it. Every time we develop a new strategy, they counter it faster than we can implement it." The human fleet was still an hour away from the battle when the Coalition's defensive line finally began to collapse completely. The jump gate, which they had been trying to protect, was now under direct attack from swarm ships that had broken through the defensive perimeter. Stevens looked at the tactical display, showing the approaching human fleet, and then at the chaos of the main battle. 50 small human ships against thousands of swarm vessels that had just defeated the combined might of the galaxy's greatest civilizations. The odds were not just bad, they were mathematically impossible. "Sir," she said to Morrison, "maybe we should reconsider our approach. If the Coalition cannot stop them with superior numbers and technology, what can we possibly do?" Morrison looked at the display, showing their quantum disruption arrays and the experimental systems that Dr. Torres had designed. Everything humanity had learned about the swarm, every insight that Parker and Johnson and Reeves had developed, was built into these 50 small ships. "We do what humans have always done when faced with impossible odds," he said quietly. "We change the rules of the game." The Coalition's last stand was failing, But humanity's first battle was about to begin. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Nexus system, just as Admiral Castellanos was preparing to give the order to retreat. 50 small ships appeared against the backdrop of stars, looking tiny and fragile compared to the massive battle raging in the distance. Captain Morrison stood on the bridge of the Defiant and watched the chaos unfolding before them. Thousands of swarm ships swarmed around the remaining coalition forces like angry insects. The space around the jump gate was filled with the wreckage of destroyed vessels and the bright flashes of weapons fire. It looked like the end of everything. "All ships, this is Morrison," he said into his communication system. "Remember, we are not here to fight their kind of war. We are here to fight our kind of war. Initiate Protocol Chaos." The response from the other 49 human ships was immediate. Instead of forming up into the organized battle formations that every military academy taught, the human vessels scattered in what looked like complete panic. They flew off in different directions, some heading toward the main battle, others seeming to flee toward empty space dot to both the coalition and the swarm. It looked like the humans had taken one look at the battle and decided to run away. Coalition commanders felt a mixture of disappointment and understanding. The swarm's collective intelligence processed this new information and dismissed the human ships as a minor threat that was already retreating. But the human movements were not random at all. Lieutenant Maya Johnson's gaming algorithms were guiding each ship along carefully calculated paths that only looked like chaos. Every seemingly panicked flight pattern was actually a precise positioning maneuver, designed to place the human ships exactly where they needed to be. The swarm's collective intelligence made what would prove to be a fatal mistake. Programmed to respond to threats with overwhelming force, they redirected significant portions of their fleet to intercept what appeared to be fleeing human ships. Thousands of swarm vessels broke off from their attack on the coalition forces and began chasing the scattered human fleet. From the bridge of the Starfire, Admiral Castellanos watched the human ships scatter and felt her heart sink. She had hoped that humanity's fresh perspective might somehow make a difference, but it looked like they were just another race that could not stand against the swarm's might. "They are running," her tactical officer reported. "The human ships are breaking formation and heading for hyperspace jump points." Castellanos nodded sadly. She could not blame them. In their position, she might have made the same choice. But it meant that the coalition was truly alone now, facing an enemy that had proven unbeatable. What Castellanos did not know was that the human ships were not running at all. They were executing the most complex tactical maneuver in military history, one that required perfect timing and coordination between 50 different vessels moving in seemingly random patterns. Commander Rachel Stevens, monitoring the tactical display from the Defiant, watched as the human ships reached their predetermined positions. Each vessel was now at a specific point in space, chosen not for tactical advantage in the traditional sense, but to create something that had never been attempted before: a galaxy-wide interference pattern. "All ships report ready," Stevens announced. To Morrison, "Quantum disruption arrays are charged and synchronized." Morrison looked at the tactical display one more time. The swarm ships were perfectly positioned, having spread out to chase the scattered human vessels. Their collective intelligence had made them predictable in a way that traditional military thinking could never have exploited. "Dr. Torres," Morrison said into his communication system, "this is your moment. Activate the arrays." Deep in the Defiant's experimental technology bay, Dr. Torres pressed a button that would change the course of galactic history. The quantum disruption arrays on all 50 human ships activated simultaneously, creating an interference pattern that covered the entire Nexus system. The effect was invisible to normal sensors, but it struck at the very heart of what made the swarm so dangerous. The quantum entanglement network that allowed millions of swarm ships to think and act as one collective. Intelligence was suddenly filled with massive amounts of quantum noise. The result was immediate and devastating. Swarm ships that had been moving in perfect coordination suddenly began operating as individuals. Their greatest strength, their collective intelligence, was cut off like a radio signal being jammed by static. On the bridge of the Starfire, Admiral Castellanos watched in amazement as the tide of battle turned completely in a matter of seconds. Swarm ships that had been working together like parts of a single organism suddenly began acting confused and disoriented. "What is happening?" her tactical officer asked, staring at his displays in disbelief. The answer came from Captain Morrison. "Over the communication channel. Admiral, we have disrupted their network. The swarm ships can no longer communicate with each other. They are operating on individual programming now." Castellanos felt hope return to her heart for the first time. "In months. How long will the effect last?" "As long as we can keep the arrays running," Morrison replied. "But we have more than just disruption. Sergeant Parker, initiate the chaos virus." Sergeant Kim Parker, working at her communication station aboard, the Defiant, began transmitting something that looked like random data, but was actually a carefully designed pattern of quantum interference. The chaos virus spread through the swarm's network faster than their individual ship computers could process it. The virus was designed to target the specific way swarm ships shared information with each other. Instead of trying to destroy that information, it corrupted it, causing the ships to receive contradictory orders and conflicting data about their surroundings. Within minutes, swarm ships began to malfunction in ways that their builders had never imagined. Vessels that had been perfectly coordinated moments before started firing on each other. Ships that had been moving in formation began crashing into asteroids and debris. The hybrid vessels that had been created from captured coalition technology began to reject their own biomechanical modifications. The most traumatic effect was on the hybrid ships themselves. These vessels, which combined swarm biotechnology with coalition engineering, had been the most dangerous enemies the coalition faced. But Parker's virus targeted the interface between biological and mechanical systems, causing the two types of technology to fight against each other. Hybrid ships that had been firing on coalition forces suddenly found their weapons turning inward. Biomechanical growths that had been strengthening their hulls began to eat through their own armor. The nightmare vessels that had been created from the wreckage of coalition ships began to tear themselves apart from the inside. Commander Stevens watched the tactical display with growing excitement. The effect is spreading through their entire fleet. Individual ships are shutting down, others are attacking each other, and the hybrids are self-destructing. The coalition forces, which had been on the verge of total defeat just minutes before, suddenly found themselves fighting an enemy that could barely function. Swarm ships that had been adapting to every coalition strategy were now operating on basic programming that had not been updated in years. Admiral Castellanos immediately ordered her remaining ships to press the attack. Etherian vessels that had been falling back began to advance, their crystal weapons cutting through swarm ships that could no longer coordinate their defenses. Corvin heavy cruisers emerged from cover and began systematically destroying enemy vessels that were too confused to fight back effectively. The Zephyrian science vessels, which had been struggling to outcalculate the swarm's collective intelligence, suddenly found themselves facing individual ship computers that were easy to predict and counter. Within 10 minutes of the human intervention, the battle that had been raging for hours was effectively over. The swarm fleet, which had seemed unstoppable just moments before, was reduced to scattered groups of individual ships that could barely function without their collective intelligence. Captain Morrison watched the transformation with a mixture of pride and relief. Humanity's gamble had worked. By targeting the swarm's greatest strength, they had turned it into their greatest weakness. All human ships maintain the interference pattern, Morrison ordered. Do not let them re-establish their network connection. 50 human ships held their positions, their quantum disruption arrays, continuing to flood the system with the interference that kept the swarm ships isolated from each other. It was humanity's first major space battle, and they had won it not through superior firepower or advanced technology, but through understanding their enemy better than anyone else had. The war was far from over, but the tide had finally turned in favor of the coalition. The Battle of Nexus ended not with a great explosion or final charge, but with something much stranger: silence. After hours of constant weapons fire and communication chatter, the space around the jump gate became eerily quiet. Thousands of swarm ships simply stopped moving, their biomechanical hulls floating dead in space like abandoned shells. Admiral Castellanos stood on the bridge of the Starfire, hardly believing what her sensors were telling her. The enemy fleet that had been systematically destroying coalition forces just minutes before was now completely helpless. Some swarm ships had shut down entirely. Others were moving in confused circles, unable to coordinate with their neighbors. A few were actually firing on each other, their corrupted programming unable to tell friend from enemy. "Status report," Castellanos ordered, her voice still tense with disbelief. "All swarm vessels in the system have stopped coordinated movement," her tactical officer reported. "We are detecting massive system failures across their entire fleet. Many ships appear to be completely offline." Captain Morrison's voice came through the communication system, calm and professional, despite what he had just accomplished. "Admiral, the quantum disruption is holding steady. As long as we maintain the interference pattern, the swarm ships cannot re-establish their network connection." Castellanos leapt out at the 50 small human ships holding position around the system. Each one was barely the size of a coalition scout vessel, but together they had done something that the combined might of the galaxy's greatest civilizations could not accomplish. They had defeated the Void Swarm. "Captain Morrison," she said, "I need to understand what just happened here. How did you do this?" Morrison's explanation was simple but revolutionary. "We stopped trying to fight them on their terms and started fighting them on ours. The swarm's collective intelligence was their greatest advantage, but it was also their greatest weakness. Once we cut off their ability to share information, they became just individual ships with basic programming. The cleanup operation took several days. Coalition forces methodically destroyed or captured the disabled swarm vessels while human ships maintained the quantum interference pattern. What they learned from examining the captured ships changed everything they thought they knew about. Their enemy, Dr. Elena Reeves, who had first identified the patterns in swarm behavior, was brought to the battle site to study the disabled vessels. What she found confirmed her theories about their network-based intelligence, but revealed something even more important. "They are not just using quantum entanglement for communication," she explained to the assembled commanders. "Their entire decision-making process depends on it. Individual swarm ships have almost no independent intelligence at all. They are like fingers on a hand, completely useless when disconnected from the brain." This discovery changed the entire strategy for the rest of the war. Within weeks, human quantum disruption technology was being installed on coalition ships throughout the galaxy. The manufacturing process was surprisingly simple once human engineers shared their techniques with coalition scientists. The war that had seemed hopeless just months before suddenly became winnable. Swarm fleets that had been advancing across dozens of star systems found themselves cut off from their collective intelligence and easy targets for coalition forces equipped with human technology. Colonel Fletcher, still on Earth, coordinated the rapid deployment of disruption arrays to coalition fleets. The demand was enormous, and human factories worked around the clock to produce the devices that were saving the galaxy. It is ironic, Fletcher told President Hamilton during one of their briefings. We joined this war because we thought we had to. Now it turns out the galaxy needed us more than we ever imagined. The effects of humanity's intervention went far beyond just military technology. The Battle of Nexus became a turning point that changed how the entire galaxy thought about warfare and strategy. Military academies that had taught the same tactics for thousands of years suddenly found themselves studying human approaches to problem solving. Lieutenant Maya Johnson found herself in high demand as a tactical consultant. Coalition commanders, who had initially dismissed her gaming background, now sought her advice on unconventional strategies. She established the first interspecies tactical training center, where officers from different races learned to think like humans, creatively, adaptively, and with a willingness to break traditional rules. Chief Engineer Carlos Vega became famous throughout Coalition space for his ability to turn everyday technology into military solutions. His approach of using civilian equipment in unexpected ways revolutionized military engineering. Vega often said that the secret was not having better tools, but using ordinary tools in extraordinary ways. Sergeant Kim Parker's Chaos Virus became the template for an entirely new type of warfare. Instead of trying to destroy enemy systems, Coalition forces learned to corrupt them, turning the enemy's own technology against them. Parker established a new military discipline called information warfare that combined computer science with traditional military strategy. The war itself lasted only 6 more months after the Battle of Nexus. With their collective intelligence disrupted, swarm fleets across the galaxy were quickly defeated by Coalition forces. Many swarm ships simply shut down when their network connections were severed, making them easy to capture or destroy. The final battle took place at the edge of the galaxy, where the last major swarm concentration had retreated. Captain Morrison, now promoted to admiral, led a combined fleet of human and Coalition ships in what became known as the Last Hunt. The battle lasted less than an hour, with swarm forces collapsing as soon as the quantum disruption arrays were activated. When the war officially ended, humanity found itself in a position that nobody had expected. Despite joining the conflict only in its final months, they had become one of the most respected races in the galaxy. The human approach to warfare, emphasizing innovation over tradition, creativity over convention, had saved civilizations that were thousands of years older. President Hamilton addressed the Galactic Council for the first time as an equal member rather than a junior partner. Her speech was simple but profound. This war taught us that sometimes the newest voice in the room has the most important thing to say. We joined late, but we brought something that nobody else had, a completely different way of thinking. The aftermath of the war brought significant changes to galactic politics and society. The old assumption that age and experience always trump youth and innovation was shattered. Younger races were given more voice in galactic affairs, and the ancient civilizations began to value fresh perspectives as much as traditional wisdom. Dr. Torres established the Institute for Unconventional Sciences, where researchers from different species worked together to solve problems that traditional approaches could not handle. The Institute's motto became famous throughout the galaxy: when conventional wisdom fails, try impossible ideas. Admiral Morrison often reflected on humanity's rapid rise from galactic newcomers to respected partners. In his memoirs, he wrote, "We did not win because we were stronger or smarter than the other races. We won because we were different. Sometimes being different is the most valuable thing you can be." The Void Swarm War became a case study taught in schools throughout the galaxy. Children learned that the most important battles are often won, not by the strongest or the most advanced, but by those who can see solutions that others miss. Years later, when historians studied the war, they found that humanity's total participation lasted exactly 6 months and 14 days. In that short time, they had not only helped win the war, but had revolutionized the way the galaxy thought about conflict, cooperation, and the value of different perspectives. The galaxy was safer, but more importantly, it was wiser. The war had taught everyone that diversity of thought was not just valuable, but essential for survival. Humanity had joined the war late, but they had given the galaxy something more precious than victory. They had given it a new way of thinking that would serve it well in whatever challenges lay ahead. The age of human isolation was over. The age of human contribution to galactic civilization had begun.